Hi everybody, I'm Ryan. This past weekend, I went to the regional championships in Dallas for Magic the Gathering, and I played Mono White Humans. Now, while I didn't re-qualify for the Pro Tour, unfortunately, I did a lot of prep leading into this tournament, which I think puts me in an interesting position of having a very deep understanding of the Mono White Humans list in Pioneer. And so what I wanted to do is, rather than my normal deck tech or sideboard videos, which I actually have some Mono White Humans deck techs and sideboard videos that are a tiny bit outdated, I wanted to do a deep dive that sort of encapsulates all parts that I can think of the deck, including the goal of the deck, why you play it, some matchup analysis, some good or bad matchups, and maybe critical cards in those matchups, play patterns like what one drop to play first or mulligans, different builds and flex slots. Of those flex slots, what cards are good against different matchups and what you would bring in and out in sideboarding. And then I'll show you what I played at the regional championship, why I made the decision to play the build that I did, and how exactly I sideboard with my build. So let's jump into it. First off, obviously, the goal of the Mono White Humans deck is to kill your opponent. The Mono White Humans deck is good at two things: putting a ton of power on the battlefield very, very quickly, sometimes going wide, sometimes going tall, depending on your build, and is very good at removing crucial, preferably large creatures out of the way with cards like Ossification and Brutal Cathar. If that's what you want to be doing in Magic the Gathering, then the Humans deck is absolutely for you. So why should you play a deck like this? Because on its surface, when you look at a deck like Mono White Humans where you're just like curving out and trying to remove things, it seems pretty easy to beat, right? With like spot removal. The thing about this deck is the best hands with this deck, or even the medium hands with this deck, you're casting multiple spells of turn. But not only you're casting multiple spells of turn, you're making every single card that you play a threat. And then if they try to like move on with their game plan, especially if it's a creature-based game plan, we can just move things out of the way because very often their cards are going to cast more than ours. So we can double spell, remove their stuff, jam in, they play another thing, we double spell, remove their stuff, jam. And it almost becomes a tempo deck in that sense. Now, if they want to meet us one for one, that's totally okay, because again, normally we are double spelling. And then with cards like Thalia, for example, we put an extra tax on their mana, so they're having more difficulty double spelling. This deck also has a lot of what I like to call lightning rods, in the sense that like there's a lot of must answers in the deck, and that if you have like a normal hand, your opponent has to answer this thing first before they deal with your one drops. So those lightning rods, the biggest one is Adeline, being just like one of the most powerful cards in the deck. Brutal Cathar, if you've answered your opponent's creature with it. Coppercoat Vanguard, if it's pumping more than one creature, Coppercoat Vanguard is totally a lightning rod. And if you're playing against a deck that cares about it, Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. Now, I say that Thalia's Lieutenant is the first or second best card in the deck. I'm like arguing that with Adeline, but I don't think it's as much of a lightning rod unless it grows very, very tall as those other cards. But I also just listed a lot of cards that are must answers for your opponent. So if your turn 2 is a must answer, your turn 3 is one drop must answer, your turn 4 is just like Adeline or something like that, it becomes very difficult for your opponent to win the game. That being said, I wanted to go over some crucial cards in matchups and like maybe some flex slots regarding Mono White Humans. First off is Adeline Resplendent Cathar. This card is the top of our Mono White Humans curve. If we're ever able to attack with it, it presents an incredible amount of power and lets us go even wider. Every Humans deck needs to have some number of them, and I personally believe if you're not playing 4, you're wrong. Some versions are playing 3, which seems fine, but I like to play the versions of the decks that play as many must-answer cards as possible. Speaking of a must-answer card that is very, very good alongside Adeline is Coppercoat Vanguard. This is the newest addition to the deck. Coppercoat Vanguard is a 2/2 for 2 that says each other human you control gets +1/+0 and has Ward 1. Now, the Ward 1 sometimes doesn't matter because Coppercoat Vanguard is a lightning rod in and of itself, but if you already have Coppercoat Vanguard on the battlefield and then cast Adeline, now it becomes an issue because Adeline is a little bit more scary than Coppercoat Vanguard, but now costs 1 more to be able to target Adeline with their spot removal. And if they both go unmatched and you attack, then the token that enters from Adeline is now a 2/1 because it's also a human. In a similar sense, Thalia's Lieutenant, which again you should always play 4 of, is a 1/1 for 2 that when it enters, all of the humans get +1/+1 counters. So you can just like go like, you know, one drop, turn 3 Thalia's Lieutenant, and to be presenting 9 damage very easily. But also when another human enters, then it also gets a +1/+1 counter. So a really like common play pattern is you go like one drop, turn 2 Thalia's Lieutenant, jam for 3 damage, turn 3 Adeline, trigger Thalia, so now we have 5 damage showing, attack, trigger Adeline, human enters attacking, now we have 6 damage, but then we trigger Thalia's Lieutenant, so now Thalia's Lieutenant is a 3/3, so now we're attacking with 7 damage on turn 3, after we've already attacked for 3 damage on turn 2. So that's 10 damage on turn 3 if everything goes unmatched. And we have some huge, not unbeatable creatures, but some huge, very, very good creatures. As far as our 1-drop suite goes, Dauntless Bodyguard is very good. Most of the time, it's just played as a 1-mana 2/1, but also if you're ever able to protect something, it can protect against things like Supreme Verdict, or if you're able to protect a Lightning Rod, it forces them to have exile removal or have to fight through Dauntless Bodyguard first. Hopeful Initiate is kind of our utility card. It's one of the worst cards to play on turn 1 unless you have very specific hands, but it is a card that can go incredibly tall in the late game if you're attacking a lot. And when you tap 3 mana, remove 2 counters from among creatures you control, which, by the way, you don't have to remove counters from Hopeful Initiate like kind of Magic Instinct tells you should. You can remove from any creature, specifically Thalia's Lieutenant or things that have gotten counters from Thalia's Lieutenant, to destroy an artifact or enchantment. Pioneer is full of artifacts and enchantments that matter. And actually removing counters in the proper way really, really matters. I'm going to make myself vulnerable really quick. In round 5, maybe round 6 of the regional championship, I was playing against Red-White Convoke, and my opponent played Bushwhacker and attacked very, very confidently. And I knew my opponent did not have lethal. I activated Hopeful Initiate, which they did not really see, to kill their 1/3 Ornithopter and then go to 1. But I rushed it and didn't remove counters in a way that I still had lethal through their single blocker that they then played post-combat. So removing counters from your creatures in a very, very precise way is super important into playing Hopeful Initiate. Kythian Hero of Akros is normally played as a 1/of, mostly because it's legendary, and we want to be double spelling, we want to be playing multiple 1-drops on turn 2. But if you ever flip Kythian, it is very powerful, flipping Kythian into Gideon Battleforged, allowing you to give your creatures indestructible and untap to be able to protect Gideon and then jam in as 4/4s. Something relevant about Gideon Battleforged is if you activate it and then play Thalia's Lieutenant or have a Coppercoat Vanguard, Gideon Battleforged is a human. So it gets those buffs and those +1/+1 counters remain on the Planeswalker. And probably the best 1-drop is Recruitment Officer. As far as like Lightning Rod cards, against some decks, Recruitment Officer is a Lightning Rod card. If the game ends up going late, Recruitment Officer for 4 mana can start refilling our hand, which is very, very powerful. And it's just a 2-power 1-drop, which is so, so good. Other untouchables in the deck, Thalia, Garden of Thraben, is a 2-mana 2/1 with First Strike. Non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. It probably isn't the most efficient card as far as aggression goes, but taxing your opponent's mana is extremely important, especially since if you're not playing the mirror match, your opponent really doesn't want to see Thalia on the battlefield. So you have to understand, like, when you cast Thalia on turn 2, that, like, Ossification is going to cost more, Brave the Elements is going to cost more. If you're playing Invasion of Gobakon, it's going to cost more. So really think about it if you're playing Thalia on turn 2, especially if you only have 2 lands in hand. And then our removal suite. Pretty much all versions of humans play some number of Brutal Cathar between the main deck and sideboard. Brutal Cathar is kind of like our Fiend Hunter effect. When it enters the battlefield, we can exile a creature an opponent controls until Brutal Cathar leaves the battlefield, but it also is daybound, which means it flips into the werewolf when it's nighttime. With a ward play through your life, First Strike becomes a 3/3, that's awesome! One issue with that is that it's red when it flips over to Moodrage Brute, which means Brave the Elements doesn't work. And also, it's not a human anymore, which means if you play a Thalia's Lieutenant, then it does not get a +1/+1 counter. If you have a Coppercoat Vanguard, it doesn't get +1/+0. But if you're able to then flip it back into a human, it can then take another creature. So multiple creatures can be underneath Brutal Cathar, which is so, so good. So now let's go into the flex slots. The cards that I've already gone over are cards that you are almost definitely playing and what I believe are untouchables in the deck. As far as flex slots go, especially of heavily played flex slots, some decks play a 1-of Giant Killer. Giant Killer is a 1-mana 1/2, where you can pay 3 mana as an adventure and destroy a creature with power 4 or greater. This is mostly played for like Shieldred and things like that. It's fine against mono green, but not amazing. And also, it's a creature that can tap creatures, which that part of it is pretty powerful against mono green. The issue is it's not very aggressive, so playing it in large numbers isn't super good. As a 1-of, I think it's totally fine. Some decks are playing a 1 or 2 of Knight Errant of Eos, which allows you to kind of refill your hand with humans. My issue with this card is that, like, it means I'm not attacking for a turn, and against decks that go really, really long, I want to be attacking as fast as possible before they play a board wipe or start answering my stuff. I'd rather this just be another threat that doesn't require me tapping my creatures. One kind of interesting thing, though, is Adelena's Vigilance, so you could, like, do it post-combat. It's kind of neat. Luminarch Aspirant used to be a staple of the deck. Is a 2-mana 1/1 at the beginning of combat in your turn. Put a +1/+1 counter of target creature you control. There's a couple lines of thinking with Luminarch Aspirant. Some versions of the deck are playing it alongside Coppercoat Vanguard. Some versions of the deck are playing Coppercoat Vanguard totally over Luminarch Aspirant. And some versions of the deck are playing like some number of Luminarch Aspirant. I've seen like lists that have like 2 or 3 and then are shaving like a Hopeful Initiate and a Dauntless Bodyguard or something. Or like playing less of other flex slots to be able to have this Luminarch Aspirant. I'm not sure where I stand. I personally think that now with Coppercoat Vanguard, we should focus more on going wider, which puts a lot more stock into 1-drops. And going taller and just dying to Fatal Push is getting worse and worse, which Luminarch Aspirant was very, very good at. That being said, it becomes really, really hard to force your opponent to chump block without Luminarch Aspirant in your deck. So the correct thing to do is yet to be said. Some people are playing Skrelv Defectormite as like a 3-of. Skrelv is kind of cool. I'm not a big fan of Skrelv. You know, it being a Mother of Runes. The hands that Skrelv is really, really good with is like turn 1 Skrelv, turn 2 Thalia, because then you can protect Thalia and Skrelv as another Lightning Rod. And I think that's the thing with Skrelv, is that like it is not aggressive in and of itself, but if you want more Lightning Rods in your deck, it's kind of a must answer. But also I want to be attacking. And so I'm playing a 1-drop that I don't plan on attacking with very often, and that feels icky. But also it's basically a Mother of Runes, so like I think it's reasonable to play. Now, as far as way less common flex slots, some people are playing it Anointed Peacekeeper just as a threat that can attack, but also attack their hand. Some people are playing Elite Spellbinder for the same reason. And some people are playing Thalia, Heretic Cathar, just as an opportunity to slow our opponent down even more. As far as non-creatures, most stock lists are running about 2 Brave the Elements at the moment. I think it's a possibility the correct number is 4. I think it's a possibility the correct number is 0. Brave the Elements is extremely powerful, because especially against monocolored or sometimes even 2-color decks, it allows you to just alpha strike for lethal, giving your creatures protection, which means they cannot be blocked. At Brave the Elements worse, it's kind of like a God's Willing. It just kind of protects from spot removal. Against decks that we want to be using it like that against, we're not chill with. We side it out. I'd rather just be another threat. Some people are playing Invasion of Gobekon in their main deck or sideboard. Invasion of Gobekon is just another way to attack your opponent's hand for 2 mana, so it's not a lot of mana. And when it flips, it kind of protects from like Supreme Verdicts, it protects from spot removal, and makes your creatures really, really big very, very fast. Most people are on either 4 or 0 Ossification. If they're on 0, normally there's some number in their sideboard. Ossification is definitely a non-bow with Thalia. And there are hands where you just don't have a plains to be able to attach Ossification to, but it's a 2-mana exile removal, which is very powerful. As far as popular sideboard slots go, a lot of decks like rounding out their playset of Brutal Cathars. That makes sense, like so you can specialize against creature decks to get things out of the way. Destroy Evil is becoming more and more popular. Destroy Evil being able to destroy an enchantment, like in the mirror match against Ossification, or like against the Amath deck or something like that, or destroying a creature with toughness 4 or greater, things like Shieldred is a big reason to play Destroy Evil on our sideboard. Also very good against Temporary Lockdown with Blue-Eye Control or any Leyline Binding deck. A sort of new hotness with the deck is playing Gideon Ally of Zendikar to start hedging against red-black and hedging against blue-white and things like that. People are playing Invasion of Gobekon pretty heavily in their sideboards just to be able to attack people's hands. One thing to remember about that, though, is it is not a threat and not a creature when you play it. So you should only sideboard it in against decks that disruption is the most important thing, not speed. Some people, especially the people that are playing 0 Ossification in their main deck, are further specializing in removing creatures by playing Ossification in their sideboard, normally as like a 3-of if they're playing 0 Ossification in their main deck. Most people are playing 3 or 4 Portable Hole. Portable Hole is really the deck's answers to other aggro decks and very good against like Elvish Mystics or Wolfwillow Havens against the green decks. Also is one of our only chances against Cat Oven because holy moly. Redain, God of Worthy on the front side is very good against things like Lotus or Board Wipes, and on the back side, the Shield is one of our only chances against Red Black Sack, which by the way, again, is our worst matchup. Rest in Peace for graveyard decks like Greasefang, but also totally fine against things like Lotus Field. And then Wedding Announcement is our answer to these slower decks, especially Red-Black midrange. Most decks are playing it as a 4-of in their sideboard, sometimes as a 3-of, but I think that's wrong. You should be playing 4. Those are the major cards in your sideboard that you really need to make sure you play in your sideboard. There's a few other cards that like are played as a 1-of or fun-of here and there, but I think the sideboard very much builds itself. Now, as far as play patterns with the deck goes, there's not a lot of super complex things to think about. Number 1 is what 1-drop do you play? Now, Hopeful Initiate is probably your worst 1-drop. So you probably want to play that last or in a way that you can almost definitely put a counter on it the turn after you play it. So we're trying to not play it on turn 1 unless the only 1-drop, which then is totally fine. If we have Kythian in our hand, I'm normally jamming Kythian, because Kythian is going to be the same against most decks, and flipping it is not going to be a part of our plan. Flipping it is kind of gravy and really nice if it turns out that that's good, so if it gets removed, it's not a big deal. Dauntless Bodyguard and Recruitment Officer are both cards that, like, sort of revolve around a plan. Dauntless Bodyguard really wants to be played when there's already stuff on the battlefield, especially Lightning Rods, so if I have Lightning Rods in my hand, generally I'll play Recruitment Officer first. But if it's against a pretty slow deck, or if I don't have Lightning Rods in my hand, I'm playing Dauntless Bodyguard first. So, Kythian is always the first thing you play, and then matchup dependent and hand dependent Dauntless Bodyguard or Recruitment Officer, and then Hopeful Initiate last. Now, understanding matchups is one of the most important things with our 2-drop. Number one, if you know Thalia Garden of Thraben is going to hurt our opponent, then you play that on turn 2 every single time against decks like Lotus or Blue-White Control. But if you want to bring the pain, either going 1-drop on turn 2 is very good, or casting Thalia's Lieutenant or Coppercoat Vanguard. Now, casting Coppercoat Vanguard feels bad normally on turn 2, because it doesn't give any permanent buffs to your 1-drop, and it doesn't get bigger in and of itself afterward. Where Thalia's Lieutenant, I like prioritizing on turn 2, because like if that sticks, later on in the game, you can go very tall with Thalia's Lieutenant, which feels really, really good. And then as far as our 3-drops go, Brutal Cathara, you just have to use your magic knowledge and understanding. Generally getting things out of the way so you can jam as long as you're attacking with 4+ power is super valuable, or jamming Adeline on turn 3 is also super powerful. The important thing is to always be dealing damage and stopping your opponent from doing their game plan. As far as mulligans go, I have a pretty hard and fast rule, which there are probably exceptions to, but generally at 7 and 6 cards, I will never ever keep a 1-lander, even if I'm on the draw. At 5 cards, it becomes a little bit more iffy, but hard and fast rule, never ever keep a 1-lander. At 7, I'm never keeping a hand that doesn't have at least 1-drop, unless it just has like 2-drop Lightning Rods going nuts and like 3 lands, so I can almost definitely double spell on turn 4. In fact, at my 7, unless some like very specific corner cases where I just have a million Lightning Rods and the ability to cast them all in my hand, I am mulliganing every 7 that doesn't go 1, 2, 3 and have at least 2 lands, because that's what we want to be doing with the deck. And I'm mulling every 6 that doesn't have a 1-drop, again, unless it's a Lightning Rod situation. Mulliganing aggressively is one of the most important things with this deck, because because all this deck is doing is removing stuff off the battlefield and putting a ton of power on the battlefield. And if you're not doing that efficiently and quickly, other decks are more powerful. That's just the way it is. Now, this is my version of Mono White Humans, and this is what I played at the regional championship. By the way, I also forgot to talk about Mutavault. Mutavault is amazing. Like, it's a human, turns out. One kind of interesting play pattern with Mutavault, I'm sorry, I'm doing this a little bit out of order, but one interesting play pattern with Mutavault is, like, if you have 3 mana and Thalia's Lieutenant is your best play, you can cast Thalia's Lieutenant and then mana up Mutavault with itself or whatever. And even though Mutavault would be tapped, just to put a +1/+1 counter on it for later on in the game, which feels really, really good. There's an argument between Castle Ardenvale and Sheffet Dunes. The argument for Sheffet Dunes is that it will always come in untapped, and the argument for Castle Ardenvale is that it'll always be good late in the game. I like Castle Ardenvale because it's really important to be able to make those 1/1s, pumping up Adeline. They get pumped by Coppercoat, like, you know, pumps up Thalia's Lieutenant at instant speed, which is very, very good. And frankly, if we get that deep in the game, I always felt like Sheffet Dunes won't do its thing, because if we're that deep in the game, I should just be winning if I have enough cards for pumping my team to matter, or making guys will almost always matter. And then we're playing 2 Aganjo. The reason we're playing 2 is we don't want to be flooded with lands, so very often the second one that we draw we can just use as a spell. And we can make combat really awkward for our opponents, being able to make attacks that we should not otherwise be able to make. So this build, I am on the 4 Ossification, 3 Brutal Cathar, because I want to get things out of the way. I have really high stock in Ossification, mostly because against Red-Black, it's just like they can't answer it, which feels very good. And I'm on 2 Brave the Elements. I think it's important to be playing Brave the Elements for like mirror matches and mostly for mono green. It's really hard to beat mono green main deck without drawing Brave or without curving out really well into like a Brutal Cathar or something. And Brave can just like hand you free wins super, super often, so I really like playing with that. As far as the sideboard goes, one of the weirdest things that I did for this regional championship is I decided not to play Rest in Peace in favor of hedging against Red-Black. So I played the 2nd Destroy Evil and 2 Gideon Alexandakar over Rest in Peace from my original build, because I always felt like I never really liked Rest in Peace against Lotus Field, because I just wanted to like kill them as fast as possible. If the graveyard becomes relevant, then like I haven't done my job properly. So it's only good against Greasefang, and frankly, I'm okay with making my matchups better against a lot of other decks, while making my matchup slightly worse against Greasefang. And then you also have to remember, like, this deck is very quick. So if you're on the play, even if they Parhelion, often you can just kill them through it. And if they don't Parhelion immediately, I'm okay with it. So I think that's totally fine. The other thing I'm doing a little bit differently than a lot of stock lists is I'm not playing Invasion of Gobakhan. I always feel like Invasion of Gobakhan, if I'm spending my turn 2 doing that, which frankly, if you're playing that card, you're casting on turn 2 or 3 so that you can eat up their hand to either get rid of like board wipes or get rid of combo pieces or something like that. I want to be casting a threat. Like, I want to be trying to kill my opponent. I'm not taking a turn off to try to make something cost 2 more. Like, I'm not interested in that. Instead, in that slot, I'm playing Redain. Redain is a threat in and of itself, which I can cast and curve into on turn 3. Makes non-creature spells that cost 4 or greater, cost 2 more, which basically everything but temporary lockdown are the things that we want to be taking with Invasion of Gobakhan anyway, and it hits all of them in our opponent's hand. And the opposite side of Redain, again, is our only way to beat red-black. Other than that, the sideboard's pretty stock. So what I wanted to do is kind of take you through my sideboard guide with sort of a brief explanation on why I'm doing this. Because I made a sideboard guide basically against every playable deck in the format. So rather than the top 10, I'm going to bring you through it all. I don't want to like totally bore you though, so I'm not going to go like super in depth about these card choices because I've already done that and told you what all these cards are for. So I'm only going to provide an explanation if there's like a reason to provide that explanation. So this is going to go kind of quick. Against red-black midrange, I bring in 4 Wedding Announcement. I bring in the 2 Gideon and the 2 Destroy Evil. It's fine against Fable, but also it's mostly for like Shieldred. And we're bringing out Brutal Cathar because they have removal, so nothing stays away. The best Brave the Elements is like to blank spot removal, and I'd rather just play another threat. And we're going to shave on 3 Thalia Garnithraben. So I know I just said I wasn't going to explain, but I know this is kind of weird. So the reason I shave on Thalia Garnithraben is I strongly feel that the red-black deck is totally okay with their Fatal Push costing 2, and their like Power Word kills costing 3. Like, I think they're okay with that. They're just going to kill Thalia and move on. I would rather be casting a more important threat, like literally anything else in my deck, than a weak threat on turn 2. The only thing Thalia is very good against is Fable the Mirror Breaker. Making that cost 4 is like pretty backbreaking, but also Fable isn't insane against us, so I think shaving on Thalia is very good. So that's how I sideboard against red-black. Against mono green, I bring in 4 Portable Hole for Wolfwell Haven and Elvish Mystic. I bring in 2 Destroy Evil for Wolfwell Haven and their big creatures to be able to attack through them, and 2 Redain. Being a flyer kind of matters sometimes, but also making their Storm the Festivals and Karn cost more is very important. And we're bringing in Brutal Cathar because, again, the point against mono green is to curve out and to remove their big creature that they play, keep jamming. I'm removing 4 Dauntless Bodyguards. Dauntless Bodyguard doesn't really protect against anything. You'll see us shaving Dauntless Bodyguard quite a bit, actually, in the sideboard guide. We're cutting 3 Adeline because I don't want to like totally destroy my curve, because like we need to curve against mono green. We don't necessarily need to curve against red black, which is why we're okay with playing a bunch of 3-drops. And they can block Adeline efficiently very often. And we're shaving on 2 Thalia Garden of Thraben. The thing is that they, unless they have a Wolfwell Haven hand, Thalia doesn't really stop their massive mana. So this is how I sideboard against mono green. Against blue-white control, I bring in the 4 Wedding Announcements. This is going to be kind of similar to red-black, by the way. I bring in the 2 Gideons, just to be super, super threat dense. 2 Destroy Evils for like temporary lockdowns, and 2 Redains for things like Farewell and Sunfall and Supreme Verdict. We're bringing out Brutal Cathar because it doesn't actually hit anything. Bringing out the Brave the Elements because it doesn't actually do anything besides like the very little spot removal is protecting against. Bringing out 4 Ossifications because it hits their Planeswalkers, but if they untap with a Planeswalker, then we're in a lot of trouble anyway. And we're shaving 1 Hopeful Initiate. The reason we're shaving Hopeful Initiate instead of Dauntless Bodyguard is Dauntless Bodyguard actually does something against Supreme Verdict, where Hopeful Initiate, you need another creature to be able to make it big, and they can just remove that creature very easily. So this is how I sideboard against blue-white control. Against red-black sack, which by the way is our total nightmare matchup, we are going to do a giant sideboard. We're bringing in 4 White Announcement. We just have to go like really, 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 really efficient. We're bringing in Portable Holes for the Witches' Ovens and like and other things to be able to deal with them. Gideon is really hard for them to answer. Redain we're doing for the shield side to make it so Mayhem Devil is a blank. I'm bringing out the Brave the Elements because it doesn't actually do anything. Brutal Cathars because it's super easy for them to remove. The Dauntless Bodyguards because X1s are just feel so bad against this deck. And then for the same reason, Thalia Garden of Thraben. So I sideboard against red-black sack. Against Lotus Field, it's kind of a weird sideboard because I have more cards I don't want than cards I do want. So I'm bringing in a lot of cards that are just like better cards than I'm taking out. I'm bringing in 2 Gideons. I bring in the 4 Wedding Announcements. Again, this is mostly because like I don't think Wedding Announcement is particularly good, but because like I need to bring out certain cards. And we're bringing in 2 Redains. Redain is very good against this deck. Being able to cast it on 3, making their cards cost more is super strong. Bringing out our removal, our 4 Ossification, and 3 Brutal Cathar. Frankly, my strong feeling about removal against this deck is, well, yes. Sorry, we're bringing 2 Brutal Cathar. We're leaving 1 in. My strong feeling about removal against this deck is, yes, they have more creatures post board, but very often, like, it's just as a comma, and then they kill us or wipe our board after they untap a bunch of Lotuses. So we're just like, I'm not interested in that. And then Brave the Elements does literally nothing. We're keeping in 1 Brutal Cathar in case they like hit their not Zakama creature, and then we can remove it and we might have it in our hand. But this is how I sideboard against Lotus. Against Greasefang, like we already talked about, I am kind of trying to avoid that matchup. However, Destroy Evil is pretty good because they hit the vehicles before they attack. And we're taking out 2 Brutal Cathar. They have plenty of removal, and we're not afraid of their mid-range plan. So I sideboard against Greasefang. We just need to kill them as fast as possible. Against all of the Spirit variants, I like bringing in Portable Hole because it hits their creatures, and bringing in 1 Brutal Cathar. So we're just bringing in this creature removal. We're cutting Thalia. It's against the mono blue and blue white version. Yeah, they have like the counter spells, but like if they're not casting their creatures and casting counter spells on our cards, like instead, I'm kind of okay with that. I'd rather have really efficient creatures to be able to threaten their life total with. And then we're shaving Dauntless Bodyguard because like it's probably the worst card in our deck otherwise, and so it's often our shaveable card. So I sideboard against Spirit variants. Against the Omnath to Light deck, I like bringing in Destroy Evil because it can get rid of Omnath at instant speed, which is amazing. And then they also have like enchantment removal like Leyline Binding and temporary lockdown that we like to deal with. And then Redain can stop Bring to Light, can stop make things that like matter cost more. Bringing out Brutal Cathar because they have plenty of removal, and then we bring out a Dauntless Bodyguard. So I sideboard against Omnath to Light. In the mirror match against Mono White Humans, we're bringing in Portable Hole for obvious reasons. We're bringing in 2 Destroy Evil because, like, 1, it can kill Adelaine, and 2, being able to take out an Ossification at instant speed feels very good. And we're bringing in 1 Brutal Cathar. We're going to be taking out 4 Thalia for obvious reasons. Like, it doesn't actually nerf our opponent's deck. And then we're taking out 3 Dauntless Bodyguards because, again, it's probably the worst card in our deck, and everything else is just better in the mirror match. So I sideboard against humans. Against the creativity variants, because we don't have Rest in Peace, we're sideboarding the same. I like Destroy Evil. Even against the Worm version, I'm pretty interested in just killing the Word at instant speed. Yes, they get a bunch of 5/5s, but like, I think that's better than just dying. It's also fine against the other versions of the deck. Redain, because it makes creativity cost more, and like making big score cost more feels really good, etc., etc. We're taking out Brave the Elements because the best it is spot removal deterrent, which is not where we want to be. I'd rather just play another threat. And then we are cutting Brutal Cathars because they don't play a lot of creatures we care about. So I sideboard against creativity. Against Mono Red aggro, we're bringing in Portable Hole for obvious reasons. And this is also true against the Tarka Red. We're bringing out the Brutal Cathars because they have too much removal for it. And casting 3 mana is like a lot. And then we're cutting 1 Brave the Elements. The reason we're leaving 1 Brave the Elements in is very often we can Alpha Strike because they are all the same thing. Or like, you know, there's often a situation where they like go to remove with like a Lightning Strike or something like that. You protect, and now you have a blocker that's pro-red. Good luck. You know, it feels really good. Against Blue-Black Rogues, we're bringing in Portable Hole because everything costs super little except for, you know, their fun of cards. We're bringing out Brave the Elements because then it's only for spot removal. It doesn't actually do anything. And we're bringing out 2 Brutal Cathar. Brutal Cathar is only fine because they have a lot of removal. So I sideboard against Rogues. Against Enigmatic Fires, we're bringing in Destroy Evil because enchantments and also, like, you know, the targets and stuff like that. Destroy Evil is insane against this deck, by the way. Bringing in Redain, making it so they can't do their combo as fast. Hopefully we'll kill them before they can do it. Bringing out Brave the Elements because they're 5 colors. And bringing out 2 Brutal Cathar. They have a lot of removal, so it's only fine. And a lot of stuff does stuff when it enters. And so Brutal Cathar going away can often be devastating. So this is how I sideboard against Enigmatic Fires. Against Blue-Black Control, we are bringing in 4 Wedding Announcements. So this is kind of similar to Blue-White, except we're not bringing in Destroy Evil. Bringing in the Gideons, and we're bringing in Redains. We're taking out Brave the Elements. I don't feel like I have to say it again. Brutal Cathars, and we are bringing out 3 Ossification. Sometimes they like side into like Shieldred and stuff against us, so leaving 1 Ossification in is fine. This is how I sideboard against Blue-Black Control. Against the Neoform deck, we're bringing in Destroy Evil, being able to take out their 4 toughness creatures. And we're bringing in 1 Brutal Cathar. Being able to remove their stuff is super important. We're bringing out 2 Brave the Elements and bringing out 1 Dauntless Bodyguard. And that's how I sideboard against Neoform. Against Is It Phoenix? This is another one that like we kind of wish we had Rest in Peace for. We're bringing in 4 Portable Hole because we can never, ever, ever beat Thing and Ice. And 1 Wedding Announcement for 3 Brutal Cathar and 2 Brave the Elements. Other than that, we're just trying to execute our plan. Against the Angels deck, we're bringing in 4 Portable Hole. I realize Portable Hole doesn't hit a lot of cards in their deck, but they like removing their smaller creatures is like really essential for us to be able to like win. Bringing in 1 Brutal Cathar to be able to remove their other stuff. Bringing out Thalia. It's only good against Collected Company, and I don't think it's worth deterring our aggro enough for like 1 card or Kaya's whatever, the other Collected Company. I just don't think it's worth it. And then we're bringing out Dauntless Bodyguard. That's how I sideboard against Angels. I'd rather just remove their creatures, frankly. Against red-green vehicles, also known as Gruul Midrange or Gruul Aggro, I like bringing in Destroy Evil because it hits a lot of stuff in their opponent's deck, and the Brutal Cathar to be able to remove their creatures and then take out 3 Thalia Guard and Thraben. It's only good against the vehicles, and that's not where I want to be, so I sideboard against red-green vehicles. Against red-white Convoke, unfortunately we have to bring in Portable Hole because taking out like a 1-drop actually kind of matters, and can kind of stop their curve and their Convoke curve, which is super important. Similar thing with bringing in Brutal Cathar. And we're going to be bringing out 2 Brave the Elements. Very little can we Alpha Strike with a Brave. And then we're cutting 3 Thalia Guard and a Thraben. A lot of decks are coming off the spells to play more creatures. And while Thalia on the play can be really good, against most hands it is not very good. I'd rather just go really tall against this deck. That's how I sideboard against Convoke. And then last but not least is the Auras deck. We're bringing in 4 Portable Hole, 2 Destroy Evil, all very obviously the reason we're doing this. Bringing out Brave the Elements. We're bringing out 3 Brutal Cathar and out 1 Dauntless Bodyguard. And this is how I sideboard against Auras. Now, as far as good matchups and bad matchups, the only nightmare matchup this deck has is Red-Black Sack. Total nightmare. It's like a 20 or 30% matchup is like really, really bad. The decks that we want to be playing against are like Lotus Field or Enigmatic Fires, are both decks that we feel really, really good about playing against. And everything else is really, really close to 50-50 in my opinion. Grease Fang's a little bit bad, to be totally honest. But we have game against everything. And I really, really like this deck. I'm glad I put the time into it. And hopefully the time that I put into it and in making this video is relevant for you and will help you in learning this deck even more. If you like this video and want to see more videos like this when I do big preps for tournaments and making a deep dive, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.